Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I am hearing an echo. Echo, 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 echo. I'm joined today, as always, by my co host, Anthony Marchetta, uh, uh, the Italian with the. Uh,
You're forcing this, man. You're you're
uh,
you're you're sinking here.
no,
You're going down.
uh, quick,
I
play
don't.
me off. All right, now, the reason why, of course, I do these intros is because I like to tie them in to what we're talking about today. And we're talking about Jordan Peterson, and as well as his talk with Kreeft a few seconds, which came out. When did it come out?
Beats me.
It doesn't matter. It came out
Nope.
recently. What? When did it come out?
I don't know, but I can tell you this: the Superversive live stream is not coming up on YouTube when I search it.
What?
Oh, here it is. For some reason, it was the second in line on my when I looked it up. I don't know. Whatever. Moving on. Keep going.
Okay, so the reason why I like to go up against this and mention it isn't really because of some sort of strange hatred that I have for Jordan B. Peterson, even though I do consider him fairly hateable. Um, it's that these things do need to be talked about because Jordan B. Peterson forces himself into relevance, much like Joe Rogan, and I don't really consider that a good thing. Uh, Peter Kreeft is not someone I've ever bothered to read or to listen to or to watch, partially because he is Catholic and I am Protestant. And there is very little point in me hearing arguments about, say, the Eucharist when I am very clear on my stance that one, I am not willing to go into internet wars of the Eucharist, and two, Christ is not eternally sacrificed for us, but rather he was sacrificed once for our sins, and then once he had paid the cost, he no longer has to pay the cost of our sins. There's a whole lot of things to it that I'm already confident on. It's in the same way I don't read many Protestant theologians except when I have a specific need for it. So I'm not very familiar with Peter Kreeft's work. However, Anthony, I understand that you may be a little bit more familiar with me if you'd like to go over him real briefly.
Sure. So to be clear, I'm not a Kreeft super fan, though. There are people who are Kreeft super fans. Peter Kreeft has been around for a long time now. He's got like 80 published books, which I know because it was mentioned in the interview. Uh, I have read one book by Kreeft. It is his Handbook of Christian Apologetics. It was a textbook that I used in my senior year of high school. I was in honors theology, which was it was a college level class, which having been in college level theology classes after that, I can confirm that my teacher was not blowing hot air. It really was about college level, I would say. Lower college, but college. And we use his Handbook of Christian Apologetics as a textbook. We also use Mere Christianity as a textbook, interestingly enough. But anyway, I recall reading the book and not being super impressed with it. However, I am very much in the minority. As I mentioned to you before the stream, mostly what did not impress me was that he had a chapter on 20 arguments for the existence of God, and he sketches them out very quickly. And I'm not really a fan of the rapid fire approach. Like, he's like, well, one of these is bound to work. Pick the one that's your favorite. And it's like, that's not fair, though, because some of these are based on contradicting philosophies. Like, you don't think, they can't possibly all work. And then
Right.
some of them are just, immediately bad arguments, like the aesthetic argument, which is there is the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, therefore there is a God. And his sole defense is you either see this one or you don't. And this has irritated me to no end ever since I saw it. Uh, like, I tried putting it into syllogism form once, I recall. So it's like, are you trying to make a point about the beauty of the music? Is proof of the existence of God? And if it's you either see this one or you don't, I thought this was supposed to be a proof of the existence of God. How is this a proof? Like, atheists have, if they hear the music of Johann Sebastian Bach and don't believe in God, then how will telling them this argument change anything? it annoyed me. But otherwise, I want to be clear that when I talk about my and this is a mild criticism, so that's only one chapter of a fairly long book. My mild criticisms of the book put me very much in the minority. It's a highly respected book with very good reviews from, as far as I know, Protestants and Catholics alike, for that matter. Uh, let's see, you got to understand that in the Catholic consciousness, Peter Kreeft is considered something like Catholic royalty, like a modern day Chesterton. And I have not read a lot of books by Kreeft. I've only read his Handbook of Christian Apologetics, but I have seen interviews with Kreeft. And it's very obvious hearing him speak. He's incredibly erudite, incredibly well educated. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he has ever said. For example, I think he is probably a little overly positive on Islam. And I don't get me wrong, I am not knee-jerk negative on anything non-Christian. I do think that there's things about Islam that are worth talking about, if nothing else. But I don't think that he gives it enough respect, as it were, as the existential threat to Christianity that it genuinely is. You know, looking at it for examples, it's like Islam does not want to be an example to Christianity. Islam wants to be an enemy of Christianity,
Yep.
and he has been debated on this issue, whether secularism or Islam was a bigger threat to modern Christianity, and I believe Kreeft lost the debate. So there is that. But with that said, I don't think that there's anything morally reprehensible about his position on Islam. You know, he just admires certain things about it. He mentions in the interview, I think, complete submission to God is something that Islam in the modern day, and he clarifies very specifically, he's referring to the modern day, that Islam in the modern day does better than Christianity. Uh, you know, and there's a certain masculine sense of, like, Muslims do take their religion very seriously in a way that Christians don't. And that's true in the modern day, again, to be clear, not inherently, not something inherent to Christianity, and obviously not true of all Christians.
I know many
Uh,
bad Muslims, as much as I know bad Christians. They're, it's a human
it's fair.
nature sort of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think that there's probably a generalization that is true. All of this is to say that Peter Kreeft is a man who I do think has earned the respect that he's gotten in especially Catholic, but Christian generally circles. He is an interesting interview when he has a good interviewer. We will talk about this one. Because I have heard interviews with Kreeft that I found absolutely fascinating, and I think he's an interesting guy. He is very well educated. He is very erudite. He can be profound when he wants to be, and he is a good apologist. So I have a lot of respect for Peter Kreeft. He's certainly not my favorite, but he is also somebody who I think, much like William Lane Craig, who is, you know, in a sense, almost the Protestant counterpart in some ways. Like, I, I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's contributed a lot.
Yep. And while I've not really heard the name of Kreeft outside of certain things that's going on recently, everything I've heard has been good. Even his criticisms on him are fairly mild in comparison to what they could be, especially with some of the experiences that have been had from, say, the guy who wrote I Kiss Dating Goodbye. The standard for Christian,
Yeah, that dude.
yeah, the standard for Christians are quite low at the moment, sadly. So any sparks of goodness is at least a good basis for it. Now, personally, I felt that his performance here um, didn't strike me very strongly, but that's also because I am something of a radical, and I wish to burn this evil satanic filled industry to the ground. But sadly, now is not neither the time nor the experience to talk about that. The thing with Jordan B. Peterson, however, is that he does tend to, shall we say, waffle on, and he spends a lot of time saying nothing, but using pop culture metaphor to make himself sound both relevant and interesting. There are a few things which I feel he does genuinely have to himself, namely how he treats Pinocchio, though I'm sure he probably cribbed that from somebody. Um, though I could not tell you how, so that's just libel at this point. Uh, we also have quite a few things on how he has managed to maintain himself in his philosophical world, where others have been destroyed, which I think is notable. The amount of times that this guy could fall apart and he hasn't is absolutely impressive. Um, though it does not mean he's any less of a tailor and purveyor of lies. Fortunately, though, we are not too worried about him and his ideas compared to the general overview of what's going on here. I'm not quite sure how they got invited to each other, but to meet each other. But Kreeft and Jordan B. Peterson got together and they started talking about things. And honestly, I don't really understand what these guys were originally talking about. The section on hedonism at the end of the video is quite good. Um, However, in general, I can't say that this is a very um, uplifting conversation in the whole. Um, just because it goes quite a few places. Part of the problem is that Jordan B. Peterson is not a Christian. I reject the idea that Jordan B. Peterson is seeking God. I believe that he is serving himself, as do all Monty Banks, especially when they're arriving in River City and wanting to sell the population a monorail. If that's right, am I getting it right, Anthony?
I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
That's fair. I'm saying he's a sham in a way, and
Okay,
I'm
that I
making
get. Yes.
okay, yes. Uh, you're the musical guy. You should have known Music Man. And then I mixed it up with The
Got
Simpsons.
River City in there, and I was trying to work out the rest of it, and I'm like, where are you going with this? You're losing me here. But okay, keep going.
Again, this is artful metaphor, criticism of how Jordan B. Peterson speaks. Uh, the kicker here is that any section of Jordan B. Peterson could be reasonably skipped. And there's a few things I wanted to comment on it. But before that, I'd like to hear your opinion on the debate itself, focusing on the debate. Um,
Right, so
yeah,
um, first, not debate, discussion. To be
yeah.
clear, I mean, you're like, I get your point, but for people who are listening, like, if you go in to look at it, it won't be a debate. But anyway, not the point. Like, yeah, my thought on the discussion was mostly like, I could not believe how boring Peterson was. Like, it actually kind of shocked me. Like, I've heard Joe Rogan before. Joe Rogan is many things, but boring is not one of them. Like, he is, I would not call him profound per se, and he is openly not a Christian. Peterson is like intentionally extremely vague about it, which I consider at least vaguely dishonest. But Peterson is intentionally very vague about whether he's Christian or not. Rogan is openly not a Christian, which is, number one, more honest. But number two, at the very least, Rogan is interesting and he is good at what he does. He is good at having interviews and conversations with people. I don't listen to Joe Rogan regularly, but every now and then, I have family, he's on in the background, and, like, there is no question that he knows how to run an interview. Peterson, though, was one of the most boring men I have ever heard. He would speak for an extremely long time using insufferable academic language, for, like, no good reason. Like, and it really left me just with this feeling of, like, why this guy again? Like, I don't understand. Like, there is nothing to him. It's the same impression I sometimes get when I listen to, like, Billy Graham, old Billy Graham stuff. Now, granted, you at least have something of an explanation for Billy Graham in that he was very clear that he would pray frequently to the Holy Spirit for conversion and wisdom and guidance. You have no such thing with Jordan Peterson.
Yep.
So I don't really get it. As for Kreeft, I mean, I think that when Kreeft did speak, he was quicker to the point, more erudite. Uh, he used a lot less academic language, but his points were arguably more profound. In fact, I would say inarguably more profound. Peterson would go on for 20 minutes on like a single topic, going on and on and on, and go, Kreeft, what are your thoughts? And Kreeft would have some sort of like Chestertonian insight that would cut straight to the heart of it. Ironically, one of the earlier things that Kreeft did was essentially criticize academic bafflegab, which was very funny to me. I don't know if Kreeft was doing that intentionally, but it was interesting. He's like, yeah, I think that academics really don't like things to be real, and he criticizes, like, they don't like Platonism or something like that. I forget exactly how he put it. But it did seem to me that it was, I'm trying to think of how to put it. It was at least partially a critique of Peterson, even if perhaps Kreeft didn't mean it that way, which I suspect he didn't. I suspect it was just a general comment on academia, but the problem is that Peterson is very much a part of academia. Now, technically, Kreeft is too, but, Kreeft is, he is a part of academia, but he is intentionally putting himself on the outs with it, with an overtly Catholic Christian philosophy that would not be shared by anybody else. Peterson is steeped in the stuff. He uses academic language with everything.
And also, Kreeft can say the name of Jesus Christ without flinching. I don't know if you noticed that, but several times Peterson flinches when he says the name of Jesus Christ. He kind of chokes on it.
I did not, but that's kind of that's interesting. That's a moment, right?
Right,
But
right.
yeah, it was mostly that was just my main impression though. Like there was just Peterson would drone on and on for so long. The nicest thing that I could say about him is that he did get a little bit better as it went on.
Yes.
And I wouldn't even say that like he started off like just awfully.
Yeah.
Literally, if I was not listening for Kreeft, I would not have listened to it at all. Uh, but he does get better later on, and he gets a little bit more relevant. And I think when he started talking about like literary works and things like that, he I think Peterson could say a little bit more and a little bit more clearly, and that helped him a bit. But I wouldn't call him interesting, good, or profound. I've heard other people say similar stuff in a much more concise and way, and in a much less, like, this is gonna be mean, but a much less droning voice. Like, he just sounded boring. And I don't really like. That was my main impression. It's like, I have absolutely no opinion of Jordan Peterson. I don't care about him. And when I say I don't care about him, I mean that the most I've seen before this interview, like the most I've seen, is the famous, so what you're really saying interview. Right? Which is which, don't get me wrong, is quite funny. But that was it. That was like my entire experience with Jordan Peterson was that interview. And I knew that there were people who I respected greatly who were huge Peterson fans. Who were Peterson fans to the point that I've heard them call him like one of the most profound men that they had ever heard who wasn't religious. Like, and I've heard people like Vox Day say that they think that he is an absolute total charlatan. He's a liar. He has a cult of personality. So either way, you're expecting something like, I'm expecting Peterson to at least come across with a force of personality, and there was nothing. He was like a black hole of personality. Like that was just the major impression that I got out of him, was that I don't understand why people listen to him. Kreeft, on the other hand, I think did fine. I think that when he did speak, what he said was relevant, profound, it was interesting, it was Christ-like. Again, I don't really agree with the comments that he made on Islam, but I also don't think that they were like egregiously wrong. Like, I think that I would be willing to have like a discussion about them, and maybe Kreeft could talk me into it or something, But otherwise, like, I think that he did a perfectly fine job, but I think that Jordan Peterson is a terrible interviewer.
Mm.
Uh, you know, he would speak for a long time on his own and then just go, "So what do you think?" And then Kreeft would have something that was, very Chestertonian in insight, short, pithy. Sometimes he'd go longer, but that was how it. Perhaps that's how it felt a lot of the time, because it was in comparison to Peterson droning for a long time. His interview on Pints with Aquinas with Matt Fradd, who is a very good interviewer, uh, honestly, who is an excellent interviewer, is much much better. Matt Fradd is the joke of Matt Fradd on Pints with Aquinas is that he is the Catholic Joe Rogan, and he has embraced this. Like he's done interviews with other people where like they introduce him as the Catholic Joe Rogan, which is amusing. But there is some force to the claim, because the idea is that like he is a very good long form interviewer. Peterson is not that. The weirdest thing to me though was the comments, because it felt like the comments had listened to something that I did not. So it was very odd. I expected the comments to be like, you know, who is this guy? He's very boring, or even not who is this guy, but like you need to use less academic language or something. But no, everybody was just like universally positive. So apparently, I'm missing something.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's my thought.
yeah, and that's kind of the kicker for it. It's well known. Vox Day has written an entire book about it, that Jordan B. Peterson cannot come to the period of a sentence to save his life. Uh, the, his language use is very weaselly. So he'll both say something that sounds very definite, but in fact, if you break it down, he hasn't said anything very definite at all. And in fact, if you take out his adverbs, he almost says nothing. Or if he does say something, it's very little. So what you would have is he would say things in a word salad to Kreeft about whatever the subject is, Islam, for example, and he would say things that you could definitely diagram as a sentence, but also was not meaningful in any way beyond sort of the how do I want to put it, beyond the immediate need of the conversation. Um, so in other words, it's kind of like a guy who shows up at a dinner party about a subject, a charity subject. When asked, "Oh, what do you know about it?" He sort of says, "Oh yes, I think," and then he mentions something that he's heard from somebody else that is safe to say, and then he comes back with something that you can't disagree with. I want to be very clear on that. He never really says things that you can really disagree with because he doesn't say anything. But when he does say things you can disagree with, it's all very tailored. And I'll get to Bradford Walker's comment in a minute. The reason why everyone likes that interview he did, so what you're saying is because he was being softballed. He was being softballed almost like it's like looking at a disability softball game or something like that, where everyone's going to get a prize. Uh, you know, the kid's in a wheelchair. He's not gonna hit a home run, but you want the kid to hit the ball so he feels good, because that's the whole point of it. So that's basically what happened. Bradford Walker says Peterson is on the regime's radar. Take any comments on social media for or against with a grain of salt and view them through the lens of the regime's desired narratives. Yes, I do mean he's an AstroTurf target. I certainly do believe that he's an he's AstroTurf. I think it's more accurate to say containment. So you have a lot of guys who are interested in philosophy, but they can't take the tough work of like someone like BAP or Vox Day or others, who speak very directly and have not that Vox Day is a particular philosopher, but like how he talks, how he acts, what his values are, which are very explicit and can be found on his blog. Um, it's it's hard to say that someone can grow in a place that always agrees with them. Peterson will never have an idea that breaks the narrative around him. Part of the reason why he's declined and fell and rose again so many times is because, like a good rat, he knows where to get himself fed and how to avoid the real traps. And I say traps with a double meaning. Uh, I'm of the opinion that everything to do with the misgendering that got him on everyone's radar way back when was in fact fake. Um, because that's what made him famous in the first place. He refused to use students' preferred pronouns, and then went through it. When several professors around him lost their jobs, either in this school or different schools. So there's always been clearly a hand upon him, and I would not say that it is a hand that is favorable to Christianity, if you get me. So this is just continuance of more of the same. Um, and there's not much we can really do about it other than to say, hey, this is how it is. But I kind of want to look at these tricks. Uh, and how do I want to put it? And sort of like excuse me. Because I'm trying to say definite things at this point. Like, the way Jordan Peterson talks is not a way a man talks. The way Jordan Peterson thinks, assuming he thinks, is not a way a man should think. There's concrete issues in reality that Peter Kreeft continuously punches at. He hits the right points when he needs to, because Peter Kreeft has philosophies and theologies that ground him, and he doesn't need pop culture to sound relevant. Jordan B. Peterson has been talking about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and stuff like that since he got big on YouTube. Um, and it's the same thing over and over again. I was taken in by it for a little bit, but then Vox Day's like, hey, here's the trick. And he broke down the trick on his blog. And then once I understood the trick, it's like a magician. It's like knowing that a magician is knowing where he's hiding his rabbit. Once you know where the rabbit is, there's no trick to it. And it's the same sort of deal. Once you start breaking down Jordan B. Peterson's sentences, it starts to hurt what you can know and what you can't know about what he's saying. And the answer is that he's saying enough to get you to agree with him, but not enough that if he was being brought up, somebody could stick him with it. And of course, there are some exceptions about it, but usually it leads to further astroturfing. Anthony, if I might pick your mind, knowing Jordan.
So,
Hold on.
oh, go ahead.
Well, if you have a point, go for it. Then I'll ask you my question.
No, I don't. I don't have one that's urgent.
Okay. So, Anthony, in your opinion, knowing what we do about Jordan Peterson, do you think that there's a like, how much purpose do you think there is in talking to him and sort of like justifying his position within sort of like the YouTube sphere, the interview sphere, whatever you want to call it? Like, do you think he's relevant even though we know that he will never actually say anything?
So yeah, this gets into what we were talking in the super secret, legendary Superversive Discord. Bum bum.
Bum bum.
And you need a password to get in, and it might kill you. So I'm trying to think of how to put it. Let me start off with this. I'll make the point that I was going to make because it is relevant to this discussion. The one thing about Peterson that makes me pause is I did once watch an interview with a man who was a genuine convert, and it was a fascinating interview. John posted it on his blog. He was a former Antifa member, and he underwent like a thorough conversion. Completely, turned his back on Antifa, converted to Christianity, Catholicism specifically, but Christianity. dedicated his life to Jesus Christ, like the whole 100% turnaround, and it was, as far as I could tell, like it was totally sincere. He was going out there, he was saying the stuff, and like it could be wrong, but that was the read that, anybody could be lying. Right, but that was the read that I got, was that he meant it. But what was the one thing about Peterson that made me pause is that they asked him like why he converted. And one of the main reasons that he gave was Peterson's series on the Bible. He said, you need to understand that in like the hyper leftist world that I like was steeped in, like that extreme ultra radical leftist world I was in, the idea that the Bible was anything more than like, illiterate the scribblings of nearly illiterate goat herders was like ludicrous. So seeing somebody break down all of the symbolism and meaning and all of the subtle things going on in the background of the Bible, like absolutely blew my mind. It mesmerized me. Like I didn't think that such a thing was possible. And he did say that it was Peterson's series that convinced him. So that does make me go, again, huh, that's interesting. I will admit, though, that's probably like an extremely limited audience that would find like an extreme value in it. But in terms of like, should Kreeft have done the interview? I don't have a problem with Kreeft doing an interview with Peterson. Like, here's the thing. All of this stuff that we're talking about, the fact is that if you ask the average guy on the street about Peterson, you will 99 times, I would say probably 99 times out of 100, you will get one of two answers. Either, isn't he the right-wing nut job, from people who are leftists who might have heard his name. This is people, by the way, this is just people who even have heard of him. Or, oh yeah, Peterson. I know him. He's cool. And that's it. That's what you will get. And if you're an academic like Kreeft who has looked into Peterson, probably what you'll see is, oh, so he's defending, like, and Peterson mentions this at one point. It's like, I like your work on this stuff. Like, oh, so you're defending the concept of objective truth, and you're defending the idea that religion has a place in society, and that atheism, and the scientific worldview have flaws in it, It's like, yeah, that is something that I appreciate and I could get behind. And even you're, showing sympathy and giving meaning to like young men who are being harmed. And like Vox Day posted this link to Peterson, like they go, oh, he broke down in tears, and it was supposedly to mock him. But my immediate read on it was that Peterson does kind of have a point there. Now, again, this is only reading the excerpt because, like, what I really do want to emphasize, and I know that I did this already, but I want to make it very clear that, like, I did not have any interest in Peterson. I wasn't going to read an article by Peterson. I didn't even watch the full video that everybody was, like, begging people to watch about Peterson's challenge towards men, until I got in a discussion about it, and I needed to make sure that I had seen it to know, what to talk about. Like, otherwise, it just, like... And this interview makes me think that my attitude was correct because he does not strike me as a profound man. But with that said, like, if you're looking for somebody who is going to do an interview with you, I think for the vast majority of people, they're not going to go into this much depth on Peterson. They're not going to care this much about Peterson. They're going to see that Peterson is a right-wing media personality who has a very large audience. And he does. He has 5 million subscribers. That is quite good. It's not incredible, there are people who are more popular than him, but it is quite good. And, when you have a 5 million subscriber audience of a right-wing personality, and then you look into him and you see, oh, so he attacks scientific materialism and defends religion, then, like, it seems like a natural fit for a dude like Kreeft to be interviewed on his show. So I don't have a problem with the interview. Now, with that said... Like, would I recommend Peterson to other people? Based on what I've seen here, I see no reason to. Like, no, in other words. It's just like, there are so many better men that you can be paying attention to who are so much more profound than he is. I suppose there is a point here, and I think Peterson did make correctly, that, he's mocked as like this god to the incels. And Peterson makes the, I think, very valid point. These are people who are suffering because they are alone and they don't know how to talk to women. And the response to people to their suffering is, discuss. Like, so who is out there for them? Now, does that mean that you should make Peterson your guru? No, of course not. That's ludicrous. I mean, besides the fact that Peterson has his own issues with drug abuse and overdose and things like that. But even besides that point, Peterson's not a Christian, so he's not going to bring you to the right place.
Yep.
But
Like the
he's identified a real issue.
The Antifa guy that people do bring up, you know, he was so far lost that it is not comparable to, say, a soldier or, a police officer or something like that. Somebody with a more masculine and non-effeminate calling. Like, there's differences between, somebody who is, by chance an incel and somebody who actively hates women. In that same way, there's a difference between somebody who is an Antifa member and somebody who is unsaved but otherwise normal.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with you. That was why I made the point. Like, it's quite possible, when you're talking about this dude, he was in a very specific circumstance,
Yep.
where the fact that Peterson was just taking the Bible seriously was
Yep.
enough to move him onto the right path. And, like, to be clear, God bless this guy. It's not easy when you're in that
Yep.
deep in any ideology to move forward. I'm not criticizing him, but you're right.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There is a point though, right? Like,
Yes.
and I think there's the challenge, the quote unquote challenge that Peterson raised. I had a discussion with it with somebody on Superversive. If you're being impolite, you could call it an argument. I'm not going to say with who because they're not here and cannot defend themselves. But the discussion was what Peterson said about, like, bringing young men back into church. Was his challenge / advice good? I had no dog in the fight. I haven't read Vox Day's Jordanetics, so I couldn't tell you, like, Vox hasn't convinced me on anything. He hasn't. I'm not convinced Vox is wrong. I'm just, like, I haven't read the book, so, I watched the video going, like, okay, let's see what he says. And I thought about it, hearing people on both ends of that spectrum going, like, this is profound and we need to listen to it, versus, yeah, no, I don't buy it. And I was like, something is off about this. I don't buy it. And I think what it was, and the problem is that I think, you could argue if you want to, I suppose, that Vox went too far in his condemnation, or maybe he didn't. But, like, I guess you could make that argument. But Vox, I think, correctly pointed out that Peterson was trying to say you should bring people into church by attracting them with something that is not Christ.
Yep.
And that's the problem. It's like, what do you have to offer men? And the answer is, like, Christ. I have Christ to offer men.
Yep.
Like, that is exactly what I have to offer. Do I think that there could be, like, a radical manliness that needs to be brought back there? Yes, but it needs to be offered in the context of Christ. For example, this is something that it's really interesting talking with, like, left wing versus right wing. It's like, I am a huge fan of, like, charities that work in incredibly poor areas and do the difficult work, like, Catholic, I'm thinking of Catholic groups myself, but there are Protestant groups that do this too, and you could chime in if you want to. I'm not saying this as if it's, like, a specifically Catholic thing, but it's my tradition and that's what I'm familiar with. Like the Sisters of Charity of Mother Teresa. Like, I think the Sisters of Charity are incredible. That doesn't mean that I think that government mandated charity should be a thing ever, but I think that the sorts of women who volunteer to go into the center of, urban areas and sit with the dying with nothing to their name, like, those people are heroes. And on the
Mm-hmm.
masculine end of it, I think that the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, who go into, the inner city of New York, of London, of Dublin, of various European countries, but New York was where they started, and inner city New Jersey and Newark. And they go and serve the poorest of the poor. They beg for their food. They have the shirt off their backs. They run soup kitchens. They pray with them. They do all of this stuff. They are incredible people, right? Like, they
Mm-hmm.
are 100%. They are living the life of the gospel, even if you like as best as they know how. I'll put it that way to make it somewhat palatable for for the various traditions listening. As best as they know how, they are trying to live the life of Jesus Christ and bring it to the people. And Protestant missionaries do this too. Like, I'm just not as familiar, and I know they do because I talked with people who did it. I'm just not as familiar with the tradition. Like, there is a place for men in the church in that sense, is what I'm trying to say. That if you want that radical call to holiness, is absolutely there. But what we have to offer you, like what we have to offer these men, is suffering.
Yep.
But in exchange, you get Christ. That's the Christian tradition. You have to give up everything to gain it all. That's the gospel, right?
Yep.
You die for the resurrection. You give it up. You give everything to Christ. You put everything away and you come follow him. And what you gain will be greater than you ever imagined. But if you're looking for, like, what can we offer men? It's like nothing. Yeah. Like, things aren't going to get better for you if you join Christianity, except in one sense. You'll have Christ.
Yep.
Now, in a different society, if we were closer to the medieval era, in a truly Christian society, things could be different, right? Like,
Yep.
you could say, oh, because society is closer, but we're not in that society right now. That world has passed us by. And that's where the churches need to be honest. What do we have to offer men? Well, what we have to offer you is that the world is going to look down on you. They're going to disrespect you. They're going to try and tear you down at every opportunity. They won't take you seriously. You won't get support from anyone. You won't get support from the government. You probably won't get support from your family. But in exchange, if you give up everything, then you get Christ. And that is worth all of it.
Yep.
Now, I think there is, like, in a sense, there's a manly way to put that. Like, are you willing to make that sacrifice? But to put it in, like, what can the churches offer men, I think is wrong. And that's where I
Right.
disagreed with Peterson. It's like the church can't offer you anything. We can't change, like, we can't give you the respect that you think you deserve. Maybe in a different world. And I think that's, like, I mentioned to you before, I go back and forth on the concept of the celibate priesthood being mandatory. I do think it's needs to be there as an option because it's straightforward that Paul says it's superior to be celibate. So as an option, it should be good, but should it be mandatory? However, I will say one of the arguments against that I do think is a noteworthy argument is, like, back in the Middle Ages and whatever, in that era, when Christianity was taken seriously, men will do one thing. There is one thing that men find more motivating than sex, and it's respect. And if you were a priest, that was a respected position. It was like being a doctor. You would be giving up sex, but you would have an extremely exalted position in the community. So it made sense. That is no longer the case in the modern world. It just isn't.
I mean, to me, that argument has always struck me as very secular. Ultimately, if a man is going into the priesthood for respect, he's not much of a priest. He's not much of a pastor or a shepherd or anything. Because,
I've had this exact conversation almost word for word, but here's the response that I have. I think you're right. Like, to be clear, I do think that there's something to that response. However, like, it always struck me. It's like, imagine that you had a culture. I mean, you don't really need to imagine, but that tears down fathers at every turn, that humiliates them, degrades them, spits upon them. And then when you said, like, we need to have a culture of respect for fathers if you want to restore fatherhood, somebody goes, well, I guess you don't really you don't really take fatherhood that seriously if you're just doing it for respect. People would immediately see the issue with that argument. I'm not reducing it to respect. What I am saying is the culture has changed in such a way that there is something about the, in the priesthood specifically in the modern world that is lost. Now, that element to it that has been lost. Now, with that said, I'm not saying that that's a knockout argument. I'm pretty, and you come from a tradition, a Christian tradition that doesn't have a celibate ministry,
Yeah.
that is specifically a Roman thing where that is the discipline. And I go back and forth on it.
Right. But
But I do, yeah, go
but
ahead.
but the thing is that this actually ties in very well to what uh, Peterson was saying about offering stuff to people to join the church. If the thing we don't have anything to offer, except for salvation, but when it comes to how people interact between them and Christ, I am not a Christian, or I do not pray for what I get, even though I do make many supplications and requests to God, daily for my needs and for, anything that comes to mind. And I should pray more and I should do more. The. I'm losing track of it. Um, the idea that I do it for something rather than just for. So, excuse me. I do it because I have real faith, and not because I expect God to snap his fingers and magically fix all my problems. That might happen. That probably won't happen. I've
I
seen
get
both,
that.
but
It's
it's
just the
but
idea that you talk about the erosion of respect for something like the priesthood in society, and then to go, well, the priests, that's no excuse for there to be less priests. And it's like, well, forget talking about excuse. It's certainly a reason.
but the thing is that we're coming out of an era where every church, every Protestant church, certainly, I don't know what the Catholics got up to, probably Catholicism, probably popery in this Catholic church,
Jesuit
disgusting.
trick.
Jesuits. Uh, it does sort of like it to me. It always speaks of the baby boomers. Well, how do we draw people into our church? Well, we need a youth group. Oh well,
Yeah,
don't worry
no,
about
you're right about that.
don't worry about the church because we're in the black, and that's all that matters. And we're making sure that people are
The way you draw
taken care
people
of.
in is by showing people that you're taking it seriously, that you
Yep.
are radically Christian, even in the face of the sneers and jeers of the world. One thing that we really do need to emphasize too is just how shameful of an excuse that we have here in America and Europe generally. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but generally speaking, the excuses that we have in America and Europe for why we're trying to think of how to put it, like our lack of courage is pitiful. Like our excuses are pitiful. I mean, like me and you, at the very
Mm-hmm.
least to a point, we should be ashamed of the way at times that we have acted in the face of this. Like what? We're afraid of awkwardness at work. We're afraid of, we're
Right.
afraid that like my boss is going to hear me, that like what? That my friends Christ makes it clear that you should cut off your family
Yep.
if it means that you should die. I mean, he's extremely clear that you should die. He did die as an example.
Yep.
And it's like our faith in the West is falling because of what? Public mockery? Like you're worried because Ricky Gervais is going to make a thing making fun of Christians?
Oh no, not
Like
Ricky
no.
Gervais.
Yeah. Like no, of course. It's absurd when you put it in those terms. Uh so I agree with you that Peterson's advice strikes me as that kind of boomer like, so what do you have for the men? It's like, the answer should be I have a profound faith in I have a profound faith in Christ. I have a deeply lived religion where I'm going to hold you accountable, right?
Yep.
And I think in a sense that is what we have to offer men, right? Like the masculine side of the religion, they mention that that's in a sense somewhere where sometimes at least Muslims have a bit of an edge, right? Like, you'll have Muslims who they take the fast incredibly seriously, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and in the Christian West, that's kind of disappeared. It's not totally disappeared, and like, in fact, in some places in the Christian East, they take the fasts extremely seriously still. But in the Christian West, even like on official documents and things, they water it down extremely. I
Yep.
remember watching. There was an interview with a man. His name was like Charbel Rush or something. Uh, I
I'll
don't know
be
anything about it.
I'll be right back. Pardon me, Anthony.
Go ahead. I'll continue speaking for the audience. There was a man named Charbel Rush. He was on Pints with Aquinas, the interview show. Uh, And Charbel Rush was a Christian in Australia, but you could tell by the first name he's Arabic. He was an Arabic Christian. I believe he was a Catholic, but of that tradition, and he didn't really take his Christianity seriously. I believe that his father wasn't around. I don't remember why. I don't remember if it was because he was dead or if it was because he had left. I'm not sure. But he had friends who were devout Muslims. His ethnicity, whatever it was, I forget what his precise ethnicity was, but whatever his ethnicity was, he went to a school that like catered to that ethnicity, and the vast majority of the people and teachers there were Muslims, and they started influencing him in his faith. Like, they started talking him into it. He says so. Like, and these were people, he said some of them were delinquents, and occasionally, but they would respect the imam. When the imam came in, they took their faith seriously. He says none of the Christians I knew took their faith seriously. None of them even understood their faith. Was, for example, he goes, and it just seemed like, nobody really took Christianity seriously. Goes, like, it was a Friday during Lent, and I wasn't eating meat. And my Muslim friend goes to me, why aren't you? And he goes, oh, I can't have that. He goes, why? He goes, well, it's Friday in Lent. I'm fasting. He goes, what do you mean you're fasting? I saw you eating earlier. And he goes, no, I'm fasting from meat. And the Muslim would go, well, that's not a fast. And he goes, and I didn't really have a response to that. Where it's like, yeah, it seems kind of lame. Like, it's not very masculine. It's not very manly. But this is, and by the way, he's wrong if you want to get technical. That would technically not be considered a fast, but I digress. He clearly, his point is that what Christianity was requiring of him was clearly not as intense as what was being required of the Muslims and what the Muslims were actually doing. He goes, and they were just people who were more educated in their faith. Like, they would argue against the Trinity. They would go, so wait a minute, you're saying that Jesus is God? And he goes, yeah. He goes, but he died. Yeah, he goes, God can't die. And he goes, and I wouldn't really have an argument against that. Now, the way that he tells this story, and by the way, the interviewer, Matt Fradd, is going to him, like, I do respect that in a sense, because it's like, not the arguments, but the fact that they have a very masculine faith. They take it very seriously. They really do seem to, you know, they pin you to the wall if you're not practicing Islam properly in a way that Christianity does not. So, finally, eventually, he basically converts to Islam. He says the Muslim profession of faith, and that's like the Islamic equivalent of baptism. You know, there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is his prophet, and there is only one God, or whatever. I forget exactly what it is, but he says the profession of faith, which is the equivalent of the Muslim baptism. But he he's not fully convinced because he grew up as a Christian and something is nagging him. The story that, as he tells it, is that he went home and he told his mother that he had kind of converted to Islam, and he's like, I was very unsure about it, but I was like, I guess I converted. And his mother slapped him in the face and said, you're going to church. So you're back, Ben?
Yes, I'm back.
I'll finish this story. It's not that much longer. Uh, so his mother slapped him in the face and then said, go to church right now. And he goes to church and he prays in front of, I believe it was adoration, so like the Blessed Sacrament was there. And he hears the voice of Jesus saying, not yet. And that was like enough for him to go, like, I didn't end up, I told my Muslim friends, like, I can't do it. Like, I need to look into my faith more. And he starts getting really into it. And it ends with him he goes, years later, I'm talking to one of my Muslim friends, one of the same Muslim friends who converted me, and I'm having a conversation with them, but this time the shoe was on the other foot. And he, instead of me, like, I had to stop the discussion because I knew I was losing the debate and that I could not combat them. And this time he stopped the discussion and said, I'm going to have to ask you to stop because what you're saying makes sense and it's convincing me, and I need to do more research. And he says, and that's like the full circle moment. But the point is, the masculinity of Islam is something that did affect him. Also, I believe, by the way, that that man, when he wrote a book, he dedicated it to his mother and the slap that saved his life, which is fun. Go ahead, Ben. Do you have anything to add to that whole digression?
Not particularly. I'm just surprised he wasn't martyred for the faith.
He lived in Australia, not in. It was like a
Ah,
Muslim community in Australia, which, to be fair, could end up being a martyr point soon, but
eh,
uh, was not at the time.
right. Yeah. There's not much uh, for it, because I don't tend to, interact with, shall we say, visions and whatnot. Uh, One of the things that does get people is that masculinity, that Christian vitalism that has existed in times past. People like to think, oh well, the fat old knight on his steed, when in actuality, knights were some of the fittest people who have ever lived, up there with the Roman legionaries and the Greek
Yep.
hoplites. They could leap onto their horses, um, from a standing position. William the Conqueror and I believe William the Marshal both had this as a feat that they would perform to, show off. And of course, those were some of the best knights there ever were, but, it still stands. A lot of these things that people are looking for can be explained by whether or not Christians are living up to their potential. I think part of the reason why Jordan Peterson has such a swan song is, a siren song, is because he speaks in such a way that affects people because he hits the right notes, but doesn't necessarily say anything, as I've mentioned before. So they mistake his outspoken demeanor for a type of masculinity, even though those of us who know real men know that he's not really taking any courageous stand at all. Uh, there's too much confusion that people have about this masculinity that I think really muddies the waters here. How do I want to put it? When a man, sort of dedicates himself to the faith and, pursues Christ, it is a masculine thing. It is absolutely masculine. It is not a sign of weakness to bow your knee to Christ in the same way that the world calls weakness. Saying that, "Oh Lord, I have sinned," the admission of guilt um, is not the villainous 5 minute hate that someone apologizing for saying the N word on Twitter 13 years ago is. As happens often with, the usual late night talk show suspects. Uh, there were times when people would say extreme things like that without bothering to really, um, shall we say, be circumspect in how they'll view this in the future. But then again, all comedians are on the enemy's side unless proven otherwise. Getting offending the king with jester's privilege is less impressive than people seem to take it. Uh, hmm.
Keeping the jester's privilege is extremely difficult while still being saying something interesting. Norm
Yep.
Macdonald managed it mostly. He would actually say things that were genuinely, I would not go so far as to say profound, but at the very least interesting, uh, or erudite.
Hmm.
He would give good commentary. and he managed to maintain the jester's privilege until he died. Milo, on the other hand, went over that line,
Yep.
and he lost his jester's privilege. Uh, he wasn't able to tow it successfully. And granted, you could argue, well, no, I think that that's about what happened, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Norm and Milo played similar roles to each other, but Norm towed the line of the jester's privilege more. He had mastered the art of saying something that was negative about the regime, but in a way that the regime did not consider him enough of a threat to take out. But Milo made himself a threat to the regime, so he had to go.
Yep.
And Milo, to be fair to Milo, to say that he went, quote unquote, is probably putting it a little strongly, but he certainly is nowhere near as popular as he was in his heyday.
Right. He's still producing content on various channels, but it's not quite the same as it was back when Forbidden Thoughts was coming out during
Yep.
2016. Uh,
And this is not a critique of Milo, by the way, who I
no.
admire greatly for repenting of his sin and very publicly and very openly calling it a sin, saying that he was sinning and that it was wrong and that he's no longer going to do it, and admitting that it was caused by a pedophilic act that was against him that was done to him when he was younger.
Yep. And I think that's well, I don't want to comment too much on it. The thing with Peterson, though, like we've said earlier, is that he's never actually crossed a line that wasn't set aside for him to cross, and so because of that, I've never really said, once the trick was shown to me, I never really believed in it. So when I see guys like Peter Kreeft, show up on his channel, it always kind of skeeves me out a bit. Has Peter Kreeft talked to Milo Yiannopoulos? I can't say. Actually, I'm gonna look that up right now.
Yeah, Peterson. I mean, what propelled Peterson, like you said, was that he did some stuff with pronouns, but it was noted, he refused to use a college student's pronouns, and this got him in the news for the first time. And it's worth noting that with Peterson, like you said, unlike other people who this happened to, he never did get fired. Make of that what you will. And after
Right.
that, he then got really propelled. Like, that was the first thing that got him in the news. And then what really propelled him was the "So What You're Really Saying" interview. And I will admit that the "So What You're Really Saying" interview is quite funny. Uh, I think, honestly, like, my best explanation for that, I don't think that that was a plant. I think that they just picked an idiot to interview him. Like, I think it was genuinely that simple. They picked an idiot to interview him, and even Peterson was able to survive it. So, and this is what got him onto the national spotlight. And I will note that even early on, Peterson even had Vox Day kind of convinced. I recall him comparing Peterson to Ben Shapiro and saying that it was an insult to compare Peterson to Shapiro because Peterson was an honest seeker of truth and Shapiro wasn't. I have since searched for that blog post and could not find it, so perhaps my lizard brain made it up in a dream. But
Hey, I get all
I
my best
recall
memes from dreams.
exactly. But I am pretty sure that I recall Vox saying this. And then, however, like, to be clear and fair to Vox and his consistency, it was not long after that that Vox started like looking into him more and then going, I don't trust this guy. Uh and Vox, by the way, also to his credit, stuck to his guns on this, since the audience of Vox Day, when he first came out against Peterson, was not receptive towards it,
No.
and Vox stuck to his guns. And now, like, he's at least convinced most of his audience, for whatever that is worth. Which isn't really that much, but I guess, credit to Vox for consistency, I suppose. But what got Peterson Then, Peterson he wrote those books, 12 Rules for Life. I am not convinced by Vox's analysis that they're actually satanic. Uh, I don't think it's nearly that. I don't think Peterson's nearly that calculated. I think rather that they are banal. Uh, I think that they are academic baffle gab for the most part. However, with that said, for full disclosure, I haven't read Vox's book, so perhaps when he expands on his arguments for it, he can make it convincingly. I couldn't tell you. Uh, and as far as Peterson goes, though, like, if somebody were to ask me, a disenfranchised young man were to ask me for a book, besides the Bible, blah, 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 right? Uh, for a book to help them with their life, I would give them St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life before I gave them Jordan Peterson. In fact, Introduction to the Devout Life is a perfect sort of book for that type of thing, 'cause it shows you how to live out a life of holiness in the rigors and structure of everyday daily life. Francis de Sales is very clear that he wrote it for soldiers. He wrote it for, people who worked a day job. He wrote it for people who were butchers and bakers and whatever. So I think for somebody who is looking for meaning, Introduction to the Devout Life is the perfect book for you. I would not recommend Jordan Peterson.
No.
And again, like, now that I finally listened to him on interview, that's the main feeling that I have of him is not even anger. It's just like apathy. you know, he's not even
Yeah.
very good. He's not even that interesting. He's
It,
just kind of lame.
yeah. And there's, yeah. I, hmm. I look forward to the day that we no longer have to even think about Jordan Peterson. Um, Part of it is of course, the fact that I do believe he's kind of a false shepherd. While some people, like, somebody said, hey, Jesus Christ Superstar led me to Christ because it, got me started. The Lord does use evil for good. Not in a way, oh, I can do evil and it'll be for good, but no, in the sense of things that unsaved people mean for evil often gets turned into something for good for people who become saved. Like I think Andrew, was it Andrew Lloyd Webber who did Jesus Christ Superstar?
Yeah, it was Weber.
I think Webber was too deep in nose candy to do anything more than to, put out, some songs and then sort of string them together in a way that he knew would get the right amount of advertisement. Though,
Always remember John C. Wright's commentary on Jesus Christ Superstar, which is, he's like, there are various retellings of the gospel story, like Godspell, which is a retelling of the gospel story, but with the disciples as clowns, which is true, that is Godspell. He goes, or Jesus Christ Superstar, which is a retelling of the gospel story, but stupid.
uh,
Uh, Made
yeah,
me laugh.
oh, that is pretty funny. Um, let's see here. There's a couple of more points I wanted to make. One of the big ones that might kind of surprise people is I do feel that there needs to be a sort of self-policing of how of where you go and show up to talk to people. I'm not much of a man to follow John Del Rosa's strategy of being a gadfly on these things and showing up in various places I might not be wanted. Like, and I'm not saying he wears devil horns and prances about on stage, but I am saying that that's not, excuse me, a great use of my time. As I'm playing a video game, uh, it's not a great use of my time to show up in places. It's like, so Ben, you say that N.K. Jemisin couldn't, blah 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 blah, ride her way out of a paper bag, whatever you want to call it. And the answer, the response is that, you know, oh yes, I do believe that N.K. Jemisin doesn't deserve her, blah blah blah, because she was they gave her it to her so that they wouldn't be racist. I mean, she doesn't deserve all the stuff that she's gotten with this. Um, but it's not something I'm willing to go out and fight people over. There's a lot more useful period things to do with my time, and also it won't reach an audience who who would appreciate it. My side does not listen to people who are fans of N.K. Jemisin, or at least I hope they don't. But, thinking about it, and I've had time to think about this, I'm actually pretty okay with Peter Kreeft going on to Jordan Peterson's um, show just because there's a good solid chance that he could reach out to somebody who's seeking Christ and not finding it in Jordan Peterson. Now, I don't believe that it was particularly compulsive or persuasive or anything like that, but I do think that if somebody happened to click on this, happened to seek Christ, I think that they might find something there. But I don't think that as a rule, there's a lot to be found in anything interacting with Jordan Peterson. But it's passive rather than aggressively negative. Some people, like, you just don't want to interact with. You don't ever want to show up on a movie Bob stream. You don't ever want to show up doing this or that for a nostalgia critic, for example, for the negative reputation. But there's another thing to it that if I say bring a pornographer onto the show, I don't think that that would be in any way glorifying God. If we do not gatekeep our what little institutions we do have, we will lose them. Either to benign men like Jordan Peterson, who locks people in a cycle forever that never really finds truth, or aggressively evil people um, like any number of SJWs, I'm sure we can all name, uh, who hate us, hate our children, hate our way of life, hate everything that we have. Um, and I'm just not willing to give them a platform. I'm not willing to give them something that gives them more power over our heart and souls. When Jordan Peterson says something, even though he's saying nothing and aggressively saying nothing, he's still introducing ideas to our minds, to our hearts, and to our souls. The more he's given opportunities for that, the more that something can come through to actually hurt us. Like I said earlier, when he tries to say the name of Christ, he does kind of choke on it. Like, it takes him a time. He'll go, well, when they say they believe in Jesus, well, the Christ, the shepherd, like that sort of thing. Uh, I can't remember exactly what he said, but basically he bounced around the word before saying it. It's not a good sign for what he's setting out there. And of course, I know that most of the people here probably know this already, are absolutely down with what I'm saying. But I still just, kind of wanted to make sure. If there's an opportunity to prevent somebody from buying an enemy's, say, book or, movie or anything like that, that's an opportunity worth taking. Um, it's always an opportune moment to deny us to deny, excuse me, a sale to the enemy, or to interfere with uh, interfere with their um, how do I want to put it, to interfere with their plan to stay on top of us. Sure, the Superversives have never really drawn the ire of Satan or whatever in any real way, like, say, Milo Yiannopoulos has, but it's still something to consider, to think about. Um, you know, if we're going to stand for Christ, we do have to make sure that the people we invite on and give a platform to are Christian or will improve the situation for those around us. Now, Jordan Peterson invited Kreeft onto his show, so it's a little different. But also, his intention wasn't to give Kreeft a pair of devil horns and ask him to dance.
Yeah, that's the one thing I will say to Peterson's credit is that he clearly did respect Kreeft. And he let, like, I don't think he, as much as I think that he dominated the conversation too much in the sense that, he would go on and on and on for a very long time. I don't think he was, like, consciously preventing Kreeft from speaking or cutting him off.
Right.
So that I will give him, like, legitimately, he deserves some credit for that.
Yeah, and I think that's there are I don't believe that Peterson is 100% evil all the time, but it's things like this don't always show up as much as we'd like. Uh,
I think if you ask me, and I probably should be careful in assuming too much about anybody else's like state of salvation, but the impression I get now, having watched him for over an hour, uh, and having read a few of his things in the past, the impression that I get of Peterson is that he is an academic through and through, like down to his core. He is an academic. He, he obfuscates. He talks around things. He uses large words, and he goes on and on endlessly, but says shockingly little. Somebody in the Superversive Discord said this, and they are right, that honestly hearing him versus Kreeft speak was really like, the superiority of classical over modern philosophy in a sense. Because Kreeft, I don't think this was like that Kreeft was especially genius in this one, but I think that that's partially Peterson's fault too. But even then, like, Kreeft comparatively would say something like shockingly, Chestertonian in terms of insight, and that was genuinely worth listening to. He would make like Peterson would go on and on and on about something, and then Kreeft would respond, and he would make a more profound point in a much more concise way. And I don't think, like, in terms of where Peterson is going, I don't really know where he is or why he's there. Like, the last that I heard, he started off as an atheist, I know, and now he is not an atheist. But he won't publicly call himself a Christian. And it's very weird. But, like, he's also very cagey about talking about it. It's as if, cough, cough, it's as if he wants people to think he's a Christian while having the plausible deniability to say that he isn't. And that's weird. It's just very, very weird.
yeah,
What do you think?
I mean, I don't disagree with that particularly. I think the goal of Peterson is to basically be a trap, to get young men, prevent them from reaching Christ in many different ways, and I think that he exists not to help people find truth, but to obfuscate it as much as possible in a way that offends the least amount of normies, and even get some right wingers on his side. There a lot of people do talk about, like, how relevant is X, how relevant is Y. It's less to, how do I want to do it? Uh, the relevance of, say, Jordan B. Peterson, is manufactured versus a It's hard to do this while I'm playing the game and everything's going on. It's absolutely insane. I'm losing sight of things, Anthony. I'm losing sight. Um, but basically, he exists so that young Christian men will not find truth on their own. And I mean that in exactly the way it should be taken. The reason why I don't, listen to Jordan Peterson isn't because Fox Day said no to do that or anything like that. It's because once I realized what he was saying and that he was saying nothing, I did not want to listen to that. I've got better things to do than to hear nothing that flatters me all day. Um,
Well, here is the olive branch I'll make towards Peterson. Uh, I think that the media may be intentionally not ruining him for the reason that you say, that, they think that he's going to be a trap to keep men away from Christ. But I don't think that Peterson himself, like, consciously is saying, I'm here to stop people from going to Christ. Like, if you were to go up to Jordan Peterson and you were to say, your work has made me consider Christianity, thank you, I think Peterson would say, you're welcome. You know what I mean? However, I think that the media is keeping him around for that reason, because that's effectively what he ends up being. You know what I mean?
yes.
It's a bit of an olive branch to Peterson. Like, do I think that he is, again, having not read Vox's book where he tries to make this case, do I think that Peterson is satanically evil? No. I just think he's not very, like, I don't think he's particularly worth paying attention to.
Right. And there's, and that's not a bad way to look at it. Um, it's satisfying to see that Christians are can reach out to him and be interviewed by him. Though I was disappointed at the lack of um, sort of pursuant to the fact, because I did feel that Peterson could have been stuck to the post more, but perhaps that's just the young man in me wanting a fight rather than the old man being wise. Um,
um, yeah, I would say Peterson generally, he's not the. I'm trying to think of how to put it. Uh, Peterson generally is not the sort of, he's not in the Matt Walsh vein of Christians. And I know people think that Matt Walsh is like the enemy. I actually don't think that. I think that I think that Daily Wire is not a trustworthy place, but I think they sometimes hire people who are genuine Christians.
yeah, I mean it's pretty unavoidable. I mean a place hired me and I'm a Christian, so
There you go. But you get what I mean. Like, when
yes,
they hired Matt Walsh, like, I do think that Matt Walsh is genuine. From what I've seen, he's a genuine Christian. I don't trust the Daily Wire as a whole, and I think that in a sense, like, Matt Walsh is there to kind of prove their bona fides,
yeah,
right? But I do think he is, and I would say that, like, talking about Kreeft, he's not in the Matt Walsh vein, or even in the Trent Horn vein of apologist, where he goes out and he, like, debates with people frequently, or he makes these arguments. He's more in the intellectual vein of, he has his own role in this
right,
whole thing. Like, he has debated and he can debate, and he is quite good at it, simply because he can prepare himself very well, right?
yep,
But with that said, like, his role is, you know as an intellectual, and you saw him in this interview, and if you see him in other interviews too, he comes across as an extremely content old man, right? And I think that
yes,
that's a good thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's something to the idea of, like, he is presenting a vision of life in Christ, that it's like you can become an old man and you could look back on your life and you can find joy in the Lord. And he did come across that way to me in this interview. He
mm-hmm.
smiled a lot, right?
Right,
He he seemed very very satisfied in a sense, like with the life that he had lived. But you're right that he didn't, he didn't challenge people a lot. But I don't think that that's really what Kreeft tends to be about. I'm not saying that there's no place for that. I think that there is a place for it. I think there are some brilliant apologists on the Catholic end of it. I think that Trent Horn, Jimmy Akin are great. On the Protestant end of it, William Lane Craig is brilliant. Absolutely awesome at debating atheists. So, and for that matter, even like Gavin Ortland, who is a less of an atheist apologist and more of like just a Protestant apologist, I think is very good at what he does. Uh, and I do think that there is a place for that, but that's not Kreeft's place.
Right. I get you. Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna look through it real quick. We've covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. The importance of gatekeeping, Jordan Peterson's sort of like faux intellectualism, a whole bunch of other things. I'm just sort of looking through what he's got going on right now in his videos, as people see the absolute kaleidoscope of things.
Yeah, one of the things that put him back in the news cycle was that he made a video like addressing the Christian churches. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I was clear enough earlier. I meandered a little bit, and I don't think the meandering was bad necessarily, but I want to be a little bit more clear on like why exactly I said, I watched it, I thought about it, and I said no, I kind of have a problem with it. There are two reasons. First is that Kreeft he admits it himself in the video. He has absolutely no ground and no standing to address Christian churches because he's not a Christian.
Yep.
He says so
Yep.
himself. He even admits it.
Yep.
Like he goes, "I'm not a Christian, but," and it's like, "All right, so you're not a Christian."
Yep.
Like,
Shut up. Sort of thing.
yeah,
Like,
like why should I care at all what you say?
yeah.
Like, legitimately, why? Now, with
Assuming
that
you can
said,
even
okay,
make a understandable point, we don't care.
yeah. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean that he can't make a good point. So, what about the point did I not like? And I went off on a tangent here before, but mostly my issue was this. He was saying that, churches aren't appealing to young men. They are not. That young men are adrift in the world, and this is an opportunity for churches to offer a sense of meaning and purpose to young men that the secular world is not offering, and they're falling down on the job. What are they going to do about it? Now, on the surface, I would agree that, like, that does not necessarily sound like a bad message. My specific problem with it is that you cannot view church in a way where you're asking what it can give you.
Yep.
Because what it can give you is Christ. And it's not, what it can, obviously, I would even hesitate with that wording, but you get my point.
Yes.
It's more like Christ is offering himself to you through the medium of the church. And, I don't know if Protestant ecclesiology would understand it in the same way, but that's basically. Christ is offering himself.
Boomers don't understand it, but most modern Protestants understand it.
You get my point, though, right?
Yes.
Like, so I think this idea of you need to do church differently, right? Like, to attract the young men, I think is an incorrect understanding.
Yep.
I think rather what you need to do is make sure that that the churches are living out their faith in a radical way, in a way that shows their absolute commitment to Christ. I was recently thinking about this, where, I've mentioned the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, and because I've been looking into them more for a couple of reasons. One of them is that I found a musician named Brother Isaiah, and I learned he was a Franciscan Friar of the Renewal, and that was cool. He has good music. Come Follow Me is a good song. But that made me look into them. The other is that there's actually a Franciscan Friar of the Renewal who serves the Blue Army Shrine, which is like a church and shrine that's relatively close to my house, like 20 minutes away from my house. So I happen to know of, at least, and have seen and talked to a Franciscan friar of the Renewal, so I looked into them more. And they strike me as the sort of like masculinity that Peterson might be talking about, but I would not push the Franciscan friars of the Renewal in that way as like, you want to join them? Well, here's a masculine, group that you could do it with. Well, first off, even that I'm not sure if it's true, because I would consider people like the Sisters of Charity to be just as intense,
Right.
and entirely feminine. So, and which is not an insult in any way whatsoever. It just is what it is. But even besides that, I would word it instead as, do you love Jesus Christ? Like, do you want to serve Christ radically? This is the way to go. And it got me thinking that there are like, I had a conversation with someone, and they said that they admired a lot of like, street preachers, mostly, not entirely, but most of the time these people are going to be Protestants. And they said, I feel like they're doing what Christ did, right? Like they're going onto college campuses and they're preaching at people, and sometimes they're surrounded, by like screaming students and faculty, and they're fearless, they don't care. And I'm like, and something about that rubbed me the wrong way, where I was thinking, yes, you're right. Like, I get your point, and I think there's a place for like straight up preaching. But at the same time, looking at the Franciscan friars of the Renewal more recently, it makes me think that a radical Christianity is going to be more like that. I do not think, and am not saying, that everybody should be like them in every aspect. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a place for it, and I think that place is great. And I've seen, again, and I'm not even making a distinction between Catholics and Protestants here specifically, it's just a tradition I know, but I have talked to, like, Protestant missionaries. I just can't talk to you about the specifics of how they live their lives, even though I happen to know personally that, like, they are living that radical life, too. I just don't know as much about it, so I'm going to speak about what I know. But the Franciscan friars of the Renewal, while and there is a place for them, and it's a beautiful place that I think it's great that they exist. But with that said, when you are talking about like, how are you going, what is more Christ-like, I feel like this sort of radical way of transforming your whole life is what Christ is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Not a way of like, I'm going to go onto a college campus and I'm going to yell at feminists. Like, who are you convincing?
Right.
And I don't hate it. I'm not there. It's just something about it made me kind of uncomfortable. Someone going like, well, that's kind of what Christ did, right? It's like, well, Christ did that, and he served the poor, like, and he healed the sick, and he did it while saying, you have to come to me first and foremost. Like, I don't know if just doing that sort of, that yelling at feminists and then doing a YouTube show about it where you kind of show off the fact that, like, you're willing to get yelled at, I think is sort of missing the point. I think closer to the point for that sort of life is what the friars do, which is they go and preach. They preach all the time. Like, they go into, they talk about, like, they'll go into prayer meetings, and they'll go up, they'll preach the gospel. They'll preach the gospel in soup kitchens, but they'll be running the soup kitchens,
Yep.
and they'll be going to these prayer meetings, and they'll be running the retreats, like, and they'll host time in a church where they will play music that they've written to get people in a mind where they're like in the presence of God before church. It is not just, I'm going to tell you and I'm going to get yelled at by feminists, right?
Right.
It's, I have radically transformed my life for Christ. And while I don't think we need to do it in the way that they do, I think that that's what Christ is looking for. And I think that that's what Jordan Peterson's message is missing. Like, this way, it's just this attitude of the church has fallen off. And he's not wrong in one sense. The churches have fallen off, but that's not why. They haven't fallen off because they're not attracting men. They've fallen off because they've forgotten to radically, that they're supposed to be a city on a hill.
Yes.
And that's what they need to be. They need to be a city on a hill.
Yep.
That's what the friars are. It's what the Sisters of Charity are. It's even to an extent like what the Protestant missionaries who have, moved their families and are living in poverty to help build a church. Like, that is at the very least, from the Catholic perspective, the right impulse, right?
Oh yeah.
The intention, the attempt to live your life radically for Christ. Like, I can't knock that. I'm this is not an apologetic stream, and I'm not going to try and make it one. So, but I would say that impulse of going and uprooting your life and moving your family to poor areas to help people and to build a church, that's Christ-like. You
Yeah.
know, that's
Widows and
something.
orphans.
Yeah, that is Christ-like, and I would say like it's Christ-like when a Protestant or Catholic. Like I said, I'm not doing this in an apologetic way. I talk about the Friars of the Renewal because I know them.
Yeah.
That's it.
And
Uh,
and there's yeah. Yeah.
Now, if I were, apologetics would be different, and I would approach it on different grounds, and I'm not going to do that because that's not the point of the stream. Uh, uh, with that said, like, I think that's the problem with churches today. It's not, churches aren't attracting men. It's that they've forgotten that they need to be an example to men. It's something that was really a problem with the Vatican, with the church since Vatican II, right? Like,
Right.
the whole idea behind Vatican II was that the church was going to try and, you know, appeal to the world. And I think that the general consensus I read from people from that era, and it's important to get it from that era, because getting it now, you get extremes in either direction. But the general consensus I get in that from what I read in that era, like for example, I saw an interview. Do you know who Padre Pio is outside of the movie? You're aware of him?
N- no, but
Oh no. He was a friar who was a saint. He was extraordinarily popular saint. Uh, and he actually died after Vatican. He's extraordinarily popular. Like, I cannot emphasize to you enough that, like, he was known for doing miracles and things, and uh, and for, as an example of extreme holiness, right? Like, had an unbelievable reputation. Uh, and then they just made the movie about him, starring Shia LaBeouf. Uh, he died after Vatican II. Like, he did not die that long ago, And I was really interesting because there was a man who was his secretary. He was a priest at the same, like, monastery that Padre Pio was in. And they asked him about, like, what does Padre Pio think of Vatican II? And they said that Padre Pio was very much in favor of Vatican II because he thought that the church needed it. So I don't necessarily hate, like, the impulse behind Vatican II of, like, did the church need to change in some fundamental ways to account for the modern world? Uh, I don't know if fundamental ways is exactly the right term for it, but I do think that the church and the modern world, they needed to figure out how to interact with it properly. However, I think that time has made it very clear that the solutions that Vatican II supposedly came with failed.
yeah.
Uh, like, whatever they had in mind, it didn't work.
There.
And
Yeah.
it seems to me that the reason for that is that they tried to conform the church to the world when the church needed to be an example to the world. And they weren't. They failed in that mission. Now, this is, of course, largely, right?
Right.
I'm not talking universally. I'm not talking every parish. For that matter, I wouldn't even say in every country. But I would say that in the West, where Vatican II had its most profound effects, uh, it was perhaps an impulse that was correct on some level, but the way that they went about it was wrong. And I think that there is an answer here, though. And I don't think I'm very wise for thinking of this. I think this is the natural answer. I think this is the answer that Christ gives. If you want to revive the church in the world, then we need to start acting like we're the church. We don't conform to the world. We're an example to the world. We're the city on a hill, right?
Yep.
we're the we're the people who and we need to be in the Protestant churches as well. We need to be an example of how a Christian lives. And you don't do that by conforming yourself to the world. You don't do
Right.
that by making sacrifices. You do that by saying, if you're a Catholic, by saying, we're going to go and we're going to process the Eucharist around in public while saying our prayers around the city, and anybody who wants to join us can. Right? And we're going to do our masses, and we're going to preach against abortion. And we're going to preach against, and we're going to encourage that people, and I've seen this at traditional Latin masses, you encourage people to protest outside of the abortion facilities and encourage people, say, like, call out evil and be an example of the good and be an example of what of Catholic identity, and go out into the world and do works of charity and show that you care about the Bible. And from the Protestant perspective, the same basic idea. You need to go around, you need to go like, I'm going to do everything with the perspective of, this is what Christ would want me to do. And it doesn't matter what the world thinks. I'm not doing it for the world. I'm doing it for Christ. And everybody else can get on board if they want to. And once you show that example, that what does Christ want? Well, he wants us to love one another. He wants mercy, and he wants us to proclaim him crucified and proclaim him resurrected. That's when you're going to start seeing the church revive.
Yep. Yeah. People have a lot of solutions, but a lot of things is just kind of not taking the opportunities as presented. In my own church, there's a small college called Brooks Bible College that has a very good reputation. My own father has uh, taught there. It's like it's just a small hole in the wall uh, college, but you'd be surprised how much sort of pushback there were just over the security of the church. And to me, of course, the answer is, uh, look, people try to break into churches all the time. You can't, you can't really stop them. My own uncle, who was a reprobate, bragged that he had defiled two churches with satanic sacrifice. Not that such a thing can happen, like he said, but you know, it's something that, yeah, there are people, agents of evil, who live in this way, who make their choices like this, uh, and who cannot be trusted with the security of the church. But for some who are like, oh, what about the little ones? Oh, what about this? And I said, I took my turn at the mic and I said, look, we can have a couple men walk through the children's wing to make sure that nobody is snuck in there. There's options for security. But the thing that kicked me is that after all the little debates and stuff like that and whatnot, uh, somebody said, "Look, we just need young people in the church. We need young blood. We need these people, and saying no to a college when there's no good reason to is not how we do it. And fortunately, we passed everything. It was done, but it's frustrating to see that people, that older people especially, are not concerned with the future of the church in the same way that I am concerned with the future of the church. I was one of the youngest people there, and I'm 33. I'm a full member of the church. There were even some very, holy men, brothers in Christ, who were not even members, who, came to advocate for the college coming in and using the spots. Ultimately, it was 4 to 1 ratio of 4 then against. But it's still one of those things where you just kind of look at it and it's like, seriously? Okay, Pete, there's a short-sightedness that has to pass away before we can really start to experience um, revival, like we said. And as much as it's cliche to harp on the boomers, I do believe firmly with my whole heart that revival won't come until the boomers are dead. Um, just because of how they are and how they're selfish. Attitudes betray the church and prevent changes in leadership. I'm grateful that the boomers in control of my church, and the pastor who's a Gen X, understand that it's the youth that brings in the future generations of the church, not the old people. In fact, my pastor has spent 3 Sunday schools in a row talking about old people's responsibilities from the book of Titus. Uh, it to a mostly old thing. I'm the youngest person there usually, and he uses me for examples, and I'm like, ugh. Uh, if only I wasn't respectful of my pastor. Uh, yeah, there's a lot there, and there's a lot for people to unpack with this future stuff that we're talking about. But the answer isn't in Jordan Peterson's bluffer gobble. It's in the Bible. It is in people witnessing to others living Christian lives. I haven't lived a very good Christian life recently. I need to improve that. I need to show people that my Christianity is not just for show, and I'm not just the weird guy who works at the warehouse. I got to do more, be more. My salvation isn't dependent on me, but how I act in front of people is. I don't want to be the gamma in the situation as well. Like, we talked about this, I think, last week, where it's like, oh yeah, the only rational move is to be a Christian or to act in a Christian manner, but it's more than that. If I can bring, there's about 8 people or so in my warehouse, one of whom says he's a Christian, but I don't think he is, and there's a few who just kind of don't do it or are negative to it, and if I can bring even one of them to Christ, it's worth the 100-degree weather I slaved in the first month I was there. It's worth it. And I think that once churches sort of get back on track to that as the old generations pass away, I think that we're really going to see a burgeoning of it, and we'll see less success for charlatans like Jordan B. Peterson, who is a sort of antichrist in this case, an anti-teacher. He speaks a lot, but he says very little. Anthony, do you have any final words for us?
Uh, Nothing except that in 1 week we have a special guest coming.
Good night, Chris. Special guest. Tell me about it, Anthony. Tell me about it.
So, Father J. Augustine Weda, uh, who is a Benedictine monk, is going to be appearing on the show to discuss with us his book, The Eighth Arrow, Odysseus in Hell.
Oh my.
I think that's the subtitle, Odysseus in Hell. It might be Odysseus in the Underworld. Either way, uh, the book was absolutely my favorite book fiction book anyway, that I have read in years. It was fantastic. Literally, like the day after I finished it, I told Ben I'm contacting this guy, and I looked him up, and I sent out an email and got a response very quickly, and he agreed to meet with us on October 9th to discuss the book. Father Weta appears to be an extremely well-educated man who also has experience with public speaking, so I suspect that he is going to be in a very, very entertaining interview, and I suggest you don't miss it.
We're going to have a lot of fun with this. And I hope you do join us next week. Hopefully, all things will go well. I do want to thank you guys for joining us. Don't remember that if they struggle with speaking the name of Jesus Christ, they probably aren't the best example for you. Just gonna throw that out there. Just gonna softball, underhand throw it to you. Have a good evening.
Just a thought.
Just a thought. Just a thought. Are they an elf in disguise? Ask them to say an Our Father. All right. Have a good one, guys.